Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Welcome, everyone. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast listening platform and YouTube. You can now also check out the full video episode on X. Please also consider sharing your favorite episodes and leaving a review. If you do that and tag me or send me a screenshot, I will enter you in a monthly raffle for a free 30-minute consultation with me. For full episode details, including notes, timestamps, transcripts, and the show Patreon page, and other ways to support the show, please head over to my website at zachbitter.com. There you can find all my coaching services, including some new offerings for 2025. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter, where I have been publishing my training journal weekly, as well as other topic-based posts. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website or at hpopodcast@gmail.com. Well, Bob and Trishul, thank you for taking some time and coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Zach.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of stuff we could jump into with this one, and I feel like I've kind of primed the audience a little bit, at least, with having Davey Crockett on the show a few episodes ago and kind of diving into some of the history of the sport, and maybe for some of the listeners introducing some nuance in terms of kind of where some of these crazy events we do today came from, or in some respects, like even crazier when you go back far enough.
Right. Yeah. So, the sport goes back, back to 1700s, when they had the history is where ultra running actually comes from, multi-day running, which GOMU is all about. It is the origins of what ultra running is today, whether it's a 6-day race or the 1,000-mile race, or they had hourly races where they did a mile an hour for 1,000 hours, all these incredible feats of endurance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. And one of the reasons why I like doing this topic is because I can remember back when I first got into ultramarathoning. My first one was in 2010. I knew so little about the sport. I didn't know that there were timed events. I just knew about some of these kind of like 100-mile and shorter trail events, and I just assumed the sport was relatively young. So I had a lot to learn. And then when you dig into it, you kind of find out, like, some of the events that are maybe a little more popular today, as far as like the average casual observer may assume, are actually kind of the newer events, and the ones that are maybe a little more niche are the ones that actually probably have the richer history, and you can really kind of get into some interesting facts around those.
Yeah. All I can say is I first want to say to you, congratulations, before we even get into it, on your fantastic career. I followed it, and 3 times under 12 hours for 100 miles. I saw you do your world record of 11:19, which is spectacular. And actually, 40 years before that, I saw Don Ritchie break in Flushing Meadow Park in 1979. I saw him do under a half a day for 100 miles. And then to see 40 years later, to see you do it, just gave me so much joy. And for the listeners, I just want to say you did a negative split, which has never been done in history. You had 5:40, I believe, for 50 miles, and you did 5:39 for the second 50. Kudos to you, brother. And you made 3 national teams in 100K. So you're a hero to many by your just par excellence in your running.
Well, I appreciate it. It's been a fun journey. I would have never predicted to be able to do some of the stuff I've done in the sport. So it's been a lot of fun to kind of dip my toe into it and figure out kind of all the people and all the stories and things that kind of came before it along the way too. So, yeah, I really appreciate that. We can kind of dive in, as long as we're talking about race results, and just kind of give the listeners maybe a little bit of a feel for kind of how you guys got into the sport. Trishul, if you want to go first, maybe we could do it this way. I actually went through some of the lots of results. I think, Trishul, in your case, it's like over 300 ultramarathons now. What's the exact number on it?
382. And
382.
I have another one this Saturday, so I think 5K in Philadelphia. So yeah, I'm
It's a
trying.
moving target. By the
Yeah,
time this episode's go up, it'll be 383.
that's it for sure.
And those are official events too, right? Like that's not like me counting my 50K long run.
No, they're all official races with lap counters back in the day, and everything. It's an official race where the shortest is I guess 30 miles, 50K, and the longest is 5,000K or 3,100 miles. And it's each race, whether it's 3,100 miles, 50 miles, 100 miles, they just count as one. So I have 382 ultramarathon race completions.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Is there has to be documentation on the most ultra finishes, and I would imagine you're at the top or at least near it.
No, Rob Apple. He has done 800 ultra
No
marathon.
way.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
way. And for sure, because it's all documented. Um,
wow.
he has done, yeah, maybe a little over 800 now, but his is much shorter than what I've done. Mine's, let's say, 100, a 500-mile race, like a 6-day race, or a 2-day race, where he went up to about 100 miles. And so he did 100 miles down. So there is a big difference there. But the man is Rob Apple, and Ray Krolowitz is right up there as well. Ray K.
Oh, yeah.
He's
That's
done.
right.
He has run a very high standard for such distances. He had the American record for 48 hours back in the 80s.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to have Ray on the
Oh
podcast.
yeah.
I actually just bumped into him at the end of the year last year, and he's still adding to that total from what I can gather.
He was a great one. I remember in the 80s that Ray, he would be winning and winning, and his 50-mile PR is like five. I want to say 28 or something like that. He was not slow, and a 7:05 100K, and he got the American record with. I saw him do that in Montauban, France, in 1985, where he did 224 miles. So,
Wow.
salutes to Ray K.
No kidding. Awesome. Well, I picked a few events off of your list, and you can tell me if I'm heading in the right direction on the ones that stand out in your mind. But I was looking at the 1986 thousand miler that you did, which I guess was the World Championships at the time, perhaps.
No, there was a world record set by Stu Middleman, and it was a great
Okay.
one. And he did 11 days, 20 hours, and he broke the second place guy, Ziggy Bauer from New Zealand. He broke his record, and Stu did maybe, I want to say, a full day off of Bauer's record. But there were some great performances. I was third with 13 days, 7 hours, and it was on a 1-mile loop, and it was 5 finishers in that race. 2 Brits, me in the middle, a Canadian, and then, of course, Middleman, the American, and Bauer, the guy from New Zealand.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and yours was a Canadian national record, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, it was a Canadian national record, and in there was also a Canadian 10-day record, which was 771 miles. So I'm proud of that. That was
Yeah.
I was not, the goal was do 100 miles the first day, and how long can I hold 70 miles a day? And I did it for, I think, 9 other days, and then I just 69, 68, and then I finished it off. So I'm happy with the performance, and thank you.
Yeah, a very accomplished, just under 2 weeks time spent, I guess. It's funny when we have to get into weeks when we count on the tracker. You're in real ultra territory at that point.
For sure, for sure.
Another one I had was a 6-day event in France where you hit, I believe, is 538 miles, which is at 866 kilometers, I think.
Yes, it
Does
was.
that one stand out?
Yeah, that stands out a lot to me, simply because I was third in there. Gilbert Mannix, the great Gilbert Mannix from France, in his first 6-day, he did 600 and I believe 9 miles and broke the French national record. Second place was a guy named Patrick Mack. He did about 500 and I want to say 79 miles. I believe it's 579, and he, I believe, broke the British at least the modern British 6-day record, and I was third with 538 miles. And my first 3 days, I did 285 miles, and my second 3 days, I did 253 miles. So I was very steady.
Yeah.
I was pleased, and I was fried at the end of that.
Yeah, I bet. There's only one way to arrive at a finish line of a race like that. The third one I had was a little more recent than the other two, 1999 Self-Transcendence, 3,100 miles, and you did it in, I believe, 50 days and 3 hours, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and what was interesting with that race, and so the listeners would know, it's done on a city block, but a big city block, which is it's about a kilometer long, or for the listeners, a half a mile. And
Mhm.
the hard part of this race was not the distance, nor was it for me the heat of the summer, because it was done right in the heat of the summer, but it was the concrete surface. And
Mm.
when you run on a concrete surface, there's a big difference between concrete and asphalt, and of course trail, which is dirt. So I'm built pretty sturdy, and I'm grateful to get through that. But it really gave. I had to give 1,000%, and basically I averaged 61.8 miles a day for 50 days. So
Wow.
yeah, and it was basically 6/10 was running and 4/10 walking, because you have to mix it up. Otherwise, some guys can pretty much run it these days now, but that level is a new level and thank God there is always that ever transcending levels that go higher and higher. You know, so I'm grateful to get that done, and I've done it 3 times.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting event because I think they actually force you to take downtime every day, don't they? It's like 6 hours off where you can't be out there collecting miles.
Yes, that's correct. So from 6 in the morning to 12 at night. So I have 18 hours to cover as many miles as possible, and it's you know there's everything's time management in that event, and everything is having a handler to hand you food, so there's no time wasting, and you got to keep moving. And if you have it's hard to make. You're in halfway through the race, and let's say you have a bad day, you lose those miles. There's a 52-day cutoff, and they're very strict. So if you have a bad day, you got to make it up somewhere, and it's hard to make it up. So you got to be very, very steady in know what level of fitness you are, and then to be able just to be steady as all get out.
Yeah, you really can't have a terrible day and expect to get to the finish line. So that's incredible to be able to be 50 days consistent without having a big enough hiccup where it kind of costs you the whole event.
That's right. You could you imagine, and I've seen it happen. You've gone 2,000 miles, you have a little bad patch, for 2 days, game is over. And
Hmm.
you still got 1,000 miles to go, because you want to stay out there as long as possible. So yeah, it's a tough one, but I'm very grateful to have experienced that type of journey.
Yeah, no doubt, man. I'd like to get into some of the longer multi-day stuff eventually. So I've got to finish scratching the 100-mile itch, though. I've still got a little bit of interest in seeing if I can lower my time in that in the next couple of years. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But I don't know if I'll get to 3,100 miles at any point, but it would be cool to be able to add my name to that list at some point.
Especially 6 days or 2 days. You have the
Yeah.
speed, Zach. You really do have the speed. And ultimately, in any type of event, whether it's a mile or 3,100 miles, it's based on marathon speed and speed. And you have it. And I look forward to welcoming you to the 2-day club or the 6-day club. It's magical. And the sense of satisfaction and fulfillment that you get at the end of it, it's just takes you to a whole new level.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's probably a big enough difference in terms of kind of how the mind and the body behaves and something like that that it would be a fun way to kind of transition into something different and have a taste of that side of the sport at some point. Um, but Bob, I wanted to kind of maybe transition over to you and one thing that I thought of when Trishul was talking about my splits at the Dome was when I got into the sport. you were the first person I think I met that was really even talking about pace management in a way that would
Huh.
be anything close to even.
Wow.
So, like, I probably owe you to some degree the execution of that day, because had I not had that seed planted in my head, who knows what kind of crazy stuff I would have tried to do in the first 50 miles.
Wow. That's high praise. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and speaking of that event, I actually the first one I put on the list of ones that I wanted to ask you about was in 2019 at 6 days in the Dome.
Great. Yeah.
You were out there for 12 times as long as I was tackling the 6 day,
Hmm.
and you hit, I believe, 530 miles, which is that still the age group record?
It was not an age group record because
Oh, it wasn't. Okay,
unfortunately Joe Fijis was in the same race and he ran
that's right.
532.
Okay, yeah, that's right. You guys had a real close battle that year. I remember that
Well,
now.
it looked closer than it was, I think. Joe and I have been great age group rivals ever since I first ran Desert Solstice 10 years ago when I turned 50. And I've been fortunate to edge him out many times, but he's the master at 6 day. He has the overall American record. He's the one who dragged me into multi-days, so I have him to thank for that. But it's his game. I
Okay.
will say that 530 though, that puts me right behind Trishul on the. We're both in the top 10 North American 6 day bests, and Trishul is right ahead of me. Of course, Trishul wasn't 53 when he did it.
Yeah. I do remember seeing afterwards, because like after that event, the conversation was a lot about pacing. So I
Yeah.
I looked at like a profile of your 6 days, and it was a pretty flat line across the 6 days from what I remember. You had a pretty
Well, it was
solid.
for the first 3 days, and then the wheels started coming off. But I was very regimented. I mean, way over regimented. You know, you can look at people like Nick Curry, who has the
Mhm.
overall 24-hour American record, ran that with a negative split, and he is, maybe the next evolution of my pacing philosophy. He has the body and the mind to execute that at the next level. So kudos to him. But you can do that for 24-hour if you are really, really good. You can plan and execute consistently. I've become convinced, maybe others would disagree, that you can't do that for 6 day. It's too much of an unknown emotional terrain that you're going to traverse, and physical terrain, and you have to go with the flow of how the race changes. And I mapped it out to ridiculous detail, down to when all my breaks were, when all my naps were going to be, and when I was going to eat how much. And you can do that for shorter races. I don't think that works for 6 day, and that makes it more interesting in a way. Each 6 day race is its own sort of living beast that you have to navigate.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, you brought up an excellent point there. I've talked about this in the past on the podcast. You're dealing with your physical battery to some degree of like how much you can tolerate, but there's also sort of that mental drain.
Hmm.
So if you're taking on too much cognitive load from thinking of too many details, I think, and with these track races, it's easy to do it because you can see your splits every lap if you want
Yeah.
to.
Hmm.
And I noticed the fatigue of looking at the screen too often in races that are 12 hours long. So I can imagine when you're out there for 6 days, that's just like a whole nother element of kind of mental fatigue you have to try to manage by kind of rolling with the punches to some degree, so you can use some intuition and turn the brain off a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Let's see. Another one I had on, which is really kind of an exciting event just in itself. And I actually have a coaching client who's in it this year, which is the Vol State 500 kilometer, where you run across the state of Tennessee essentially.
Hmm.
And the fun thing about that, being that it's a Laz race, there's going to be some goofiness involved.
Yes.
You have the screwed division, which I believe is the one that you were in, where you can't have support at that. It's
Right.
just you and the
Self-supported.
the
Yeah.
streets of Tennessee. Yeah.
Yeah. What you can carry on your back and what you can get in convenience stores.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
it's funny, yeah, that race, I won that race in 2021, 3 days and 4 hours. And that was my best race ever. And I knew as soon as I'd finished it, that was my best race ever. And that was a weird feeling, I have to tell you, to know that I'm never going to do anything better than this. And I ran it screwed, ironically, because I'd run it the previous year and come in second, but I'd had this really sort of profound, like spiritual experience there during and after the race. And I began to realize this race is when I run for 300 miles or more, performance really, I become aware that that's not what it's all about. It's about the experience and opening up your mind and connecting with the world and connecting with people. And so I said, screw going for the record. I'm just going to go screwed without a crew because I'm not going to try to optimize my performance. I'm just going to try to optimize my experience. And I wound up beating the crewed record by 3 hours
Wow.
because I was just so dialed into the raw experience itself. And it's that to me is the most amazing thing about multi-days that I at least can't get running up to 24 or even 48 hours. If I run for 3 or 4 days, my mind, all the surface layer crap in my mind burns off and I'm just more alive and connected and aware. And for me, I used to run for records and I'll still try, but the spiritual experience is way bigger motivator for me now for multi-days. And I'm
Yeah.
sure Trishul, I can appreciate now. I used to hear about the 3,100 mile self-transcendence race and think, what the hell? That's just insane. Why would you go and do that, beat yourself up for 2 months around a city block? And now I understand it's self-transcendence. It's very powerful. Yeah, so thank you for mentioning that one. That's my favorite race.
Yeah. Is that still the record?
Yeah. Yeah, and the
Nice.
interesting thing is every year there's a crewed division and a screwed division, except starting this year, there you're not allowed to have crews anymore. Everyone has to run screwed.
Oh,
So
wow.
people who go after the record are generally crewed, and they won't have that option anymore. Laz seems to think this record will last forever, but I'm sure that's not the case. It just needs the right person in the right day. But we'll see.
Yeah, but yeah, what a memorable experience. I'm sure that you'll look fondly upon forever. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
the last one I had for you, Bob, I wanted to make sure we didn't get just all really, really, really long events.
Hmm.
Although 24 hours for anyone listening is probably thinking that's plenty long, was your race at Desert Solstice in 2018, where you hit 154 miles, 247.84 kilometers, which that one I believe is an age group record.
Um, It is still an age group track record.
Okay.
Chad Lassiter has, yeah, I was really proud to be the first American over 50 to break 150 miles, and I did that 3 times. But then Chad Lassiter came along, and he's run, I want to say 156
Okay.
at Worlds in Taiwan. That was on the road, so I'm still on the books as for the track record. Yeah, and
Okay.
that was, for most of my ultra career. Um, I was really focusing on 24-hour, trying to make the US 24-hour team. And that was kind of a heartbreak race because I ran my goal, 154, and I thought that was going to put me in like the number 3 spot on the team. Um, I was 4th among men in that race, which was insane. And that put me in the number 6 spot. And I eventually got bumped and it was very heartbreaking. But that was the first time that there had been a 24-hour with more than 3 people over 150 on American soil. It was also the race where Camille broke the 24-hour world record. So Camille actually won overall.
Yeah.
And I was 4th male with 154. I couldn't believe that. But that was certainly my best executed 24-hour. Yeah,
Yeah, that one, that event that year will be one that probably stands out in the Solstice record books in terms of just
absolutely.
how much
Yeah,
went on in that. And I mean, as you know, following that event, you can get a variety. A lot of times, sometimes it's depending on when World Championships is as to how deep the fields get. You get these years every once in a while, though, where it seems like more than normal people will kind of come down to the track and be tackling different distances or different times and things like that. And that one was definitely a full field, kind of, I guess, probably similar to this year's on the women's side, where it was
right.
just seeming like,
That was just another level,
mhm,
unbelievable. Yeah, we're going to have such a strong. Yeah, I'm actually the 24-hour now the U.S. 24-hour team assistant manager. So um, I am kind of. I would love to try again to make the team, but at least I'm going to go to Worlds. And yes, the women's team is so insanely strong, and that performance at Desert Solstice, like 4 women, I think, over 150, if I remember
yeah,
correctly. Not American, but yeah, just unbelievable.
hmm yeah, for sure. So hopefully we'll see that kind of continue, because it's such a fun event to see, like, competition at, where you just thinking, like, being out there for that long and being on the last hour, knowing you still have to have your foot on the gas pedal to stay
Oh yeah,
ahead,
yeah.
or catch up in some cases to somebody else. And I was actually, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I was out at the Fat Ox 24-hour this year, and there was kind of some similar, not quite as to the details of Solstice, but on the men's side, there is like a lot of close running near the very end of it, and there's just like
Yeah.
how you can get that much excitement and adrenaline in the last couple hours of a 24-hour is quite an experience, even as a fan, just to kind of watch play out and see
Oh
people
yeah,
fade, make moves, come back to life, and all the different things that happen within something like that.
absolutely. Yeah,
Cool.
thank you for highlighting that. I just want to add, there's one record I believe you have, I'm not sure you're aware of, is that you have run, I think it's 7 times at Desert Solstice, and I think I'm second with 6. So
Okay. All right. Yeah, I didn't realize that. That's cool. All right.
yeah,
Well, I got to get to 10 now.
yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure I've got a few more desert solstices in me, so
Awesome.
maybe we can have a friendly competition of who can get to 10 first and catch. Just a quick reminder that Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte source. They are offering a free sample pack with purchase for all HPO listeners. Just head over to drinklmnt.com/HPO and check out my full description of how I use Element at the end of the episode. I wanted to kind of give you guys that kind of intro and just let everyone know kind of why I chose you two to have this podcast episode. It's partly because you guys have been in the sport for a long time and have done a lot in the sport. And then when we look at a sport like this that dates back into the 1700s, like you said earlier, Trishul, it just, your brain starts to kind of go in all sorts of different directions about, like, well, how are these events structured and why were they doing it? And then, one of the angles that kind of sometimes comes up in my mind, at least, is just like, well, how are these events being recorded and how are we keeping track of all this stuff? And then I think as the sport now really starts to continue to grow over the last decade or so, how does those transitions take place now that we have a pretty big ultra running community? Like, what do we need to do as a community to just, like, kind of take ownership of some sort of the record tracking and that sort of thing too? Because when you look at, like, the more typical bodies and organizations that have been around to track, like, Olympic stuff and things like that, like World Athletics and even USATF, those are, like, actually young organizations compared to the sport as a whole. Um, so maybe we can get in a little bit of that, if you don't mind. Kind of the first thing I just wanted to chat a little about is, like, kind of the history of ultramarathon record keeping. How did they do that in the 1700s? Was that something that was pretty formally done and we could just kind of look back on it, or was there a lot of digging by some of the more modern runners to kind of organize some of that stuff?
No, there was recording back. Let's say in the they recorded, they wrote it down. It's the publicly found out, of course, by the newspaper clippings, and that's how we found out about the old pedestrian races. That's how Davy Crockett was able to research what he did. But they did record this stuff. They had lap counters, and back in the 1700s, I know I'm old as dirt, but I'm not that old. So I can't say for sure, but they recorded everything, and there are types of log books that shows this. So and there's been books written about this. I read a book about this one chap, Captain Barkley, and he I think he did 1,000 miles, and he did a mile an hour, and just they recorded it. They just wrote it down, and then it got documented. So and there was time taking, but it was by the clock, the clocks that they had at the time. There wasn't stopwatches, so or Casios,
Yeah.
which I still have here. So yes, they are recorded, and also, but things really got going in the modern times by around 1952, and the man behind it all was Andy Milroy. And Andy Milroy was a history teacher, and he was their club statistician, but he was also an historian. And since he was a history teacher, he took a real interest in what he read some things, and he took just, I think it's God's will or something. He became the instrument to just be fascinated by this. And he was part of the Roadrunners Club of England. And that's where it all started, the modern, whether ultra running. And it was created in 1952, as I said, or 1952. And the people that were there, that's where Ted Corbett, who is the father of modern certification, he learned it when he went over for London to Brighton in the 1960s. And so Andy took an interest to it. He became the chief statistician. And how we got back in the 80s, how we got our records ratified, it was really just Andy first did it. And then he would look at your lap sheets. You had to give him the lap sheets. And then you also had to give him the course certification and everything. So the basis of course certification and lap sheets, he would look them over and he would, make sure everything was recorded. And he would look at each lap, whether it's a quarter mile, to make sure it followed the next lap. So, so it was meticulously looked over him, looked by him. And then the IAU was created in 1980, I believe 1984. And I saw the whole start of that, and Andy was one of the original members. And they took him as the main statistician. And from there, he moved on to the DUV. So everything went through Andy Milroy. And then he was the guy behind the IAU's record keeping. And so modern record keeping of multi-days and ultra running that was based in England, it was all about Andy. And the American guy that was a student of him was a guy called Nick Marshall. And he was from Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. And he would have a statistic book come out every year in 1980, 1981, 1982. And he listed all of the rankings, the runners' rankings and times. But he also made sure that the courses were measured and that every lap was taken. And if it was missed, then they start questioning it. So that was kind of indirectly the ratification back then. And then things developed. And now there's more and more rules to make sure that everything, all I's are dotted and all T's are crossed.
Yeah, now we have timing mats, which are helpful, I would imagine, in that process. I did actually do an event in 2014, and it was one of Ray's events, and there was definitely timing mats in 2014, but that event did not have them. So he had I think it was like the high school track team out there, and they were all assigned a runner, and they had shifts, and they were just like every lap they would make a notch just to make sure you got your stuff. And then every once in a while someone would be like, hey, I think they've missed one of my laps, so that he'd go back and check and verify whether it was accurate or not. And yeah, it's a lot more manpower when you do it that way, that's for sure.
And also back in the day, back in the 1800s, they had a steel tape. And so they measured their courses. They were accurate. They went around and measured by steel tape, and they were very detailed because they wanted to make sure that these runners are running what they did. And these days, of course, the key is the Jones wheel. And in the Jones wheel, that is like a bicycle wheel with a digital, what is it, a little lap count, a measurer, and it's measured by the wheel. And I'm big, and to really have an accurate course, you have to measure it before, and it would be helpful afterwards. But it has to be done by Jones wheel. And then, of course, today it's you have course measurer A and B. So things have developed that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Jones wheel's the way they measure the marathon courses too, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think when we get on some of these track events, it maybe gets a little easier if you can certify the track, and then it's sort of, as long as you have your paperwork and everything, they kind of don't have to redo that as often.
Right. The easiest one is by loop courses. Loop courses, they just measure it, and they even it used to be at least, you had to be a 6 inches from the curb track. And for things to count, you had to have a curb track. So when I did my 6-day race, it was curbed, it was measured before, it was measured afterwards, and it was done in La Rochelle, France. And the French are very meticulous. They really are making sure all things are covered. So because they're very proud people, and they want to make sure that, it's perfection. So.
Hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned IAU, and just for listeners who maybe aren't familiar, that's International Association of Ultra Runners. When did that body come into place?
1984, and it was thought of on a track at a 6-day race in 1983. I was walking around, believe it or not, with Malcolm Campbell, who became the first president, and we were talking about, the IAAF, which is World Athletics back then, and how they didn't recognize anything over the marathon. And so I said, why don't we create our own, Malcolm? He said, that's a good idea. And it was done at the New York Roadrunners Club, a 6-day race. And then he took it and he said, who do you think we should get involved with? I said, I heard about this guy, Andy Milroy. He said, oh, yes, I know him. And the American guy was Dan Brannon and then Gerard Stanger from France. And Malcolm got it going. And what the beauty of it, the World Athletics eventually did recognize 50K, 100K in 24 hours. So the vision of myself and Malcolm came, I had tears in my eyes when they really did recognize it. I said, yes, how wonderful to have something that World Athletics in the ultra marathon field has recognized. So yay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exciting. And was there any reason why they chose those three events over others that made sense to them? Was there like a process that went into choosing that?
First, I think it was the 100K, and the 100K was simply because it was an international distance. It's like in Europe, especially. Remember, the IAU was done they're more popular than even in America here. The 100K distance, not the miles. And actually, I don't think they recognize World Athletics really 50 miles. I could be wrong, or 100 miles. It's 50K, 100K. So first it was the 100K, then the 24-hour, and then more recent was the 50K, where Des Linden was the first woman that came and did under 3 hours for 50K, and she was an Olympian, U.S. Olympian.
Yeah, I remember that event. That was an exciting time to see, because there's always that conversation in ultra running too. Is like, what happens if some of these kind of top tier internationally competitive marathoners decide they want to come into ultra running, and a couple of them have. I mean, CJ Albert. Well, I don't think CJ has does he still have the 50K world record? I know he did.
It's some of these South Africans. These
that's
guys.
Right.
There's one guy that he won the New York City Marathon. He was a South African guy, and he also won Comrades. And it's exciting to see the fast guys. Also, Ian Thompson in many years ago, he was like a 2:10 marathoner, and he set the 50-mile record. So these days, you're getting even in Americans like Jim. I hope I say his name right. Walmsley. He's a 2:15 marathoner. So you get the fast boys to do it. It gets much more exciting. I can't wait till the 2:07 guys and the 2:06 guys say, "Hey, let's give this a go." And then they'll take it to a whole new level.
Yeah, and that's actually just an interesting point in general too, because I think it's like as the sport has grown over kind of my time in it, it seems like the trails have gotten a lot of growth and attention, especially in North America. But the roads and stuff like that have kind of maintained a little bit more of its prestige, I think, kind of over in Europe and South Africa, and then your Comrades is probably like the best example of that, given how just deep those fields are and how many participants. It's literally like a big city marathon. I think there are almost up to 30,000 people at those events now, or at that event now, and there's no shortage of like 2:10 type marathoners going to that on any given year, running that roughly 56 mile course. So yeah, I mean, we're not void of fast runners in the sport if you look in the right direction.
There's a lot of fast ultra runners. There's Alberto Salazar, for example, won Comrades. He was a 2:08 marathoner, and he was in 2:14 shape, and he was the first, I believe, American to win Comrades. So, he said it was the hardest thing he ever did. So the fast boys realized this is no small feat to go fast and long. I mean,
Hmm.
long. So it's exciting.
I'd be curious what either of your thoughts are about that too, because I think like what would be the event that would maybe draw some of the fast marathoners to it that are more traditionally focusing on the marathon, and I would think Comrades would have to be it just
Oh
because
yeah.
it has the competition, it has a decent sized prize purse that could maybe be attractive to them, and a lot of the times I think sometimes this stuff is somewhat determined by like a sponsor and things like that. You can maybe talk your sponsor into saying like, hey, yeah, we'd love to see you go after that. After a win at Comrades and see if that's always been the one that stuck out to me as the one that would be the most likely attractive point.
Yeah, it is. It's
Yeah.
a lot of money, and you win a car, and it's the biggest race in South Africa. I mean, it's the biggest. The second biggest is Two Oceans Race, which is about 35 miles, and they attract fast guys. I mean, the guys that are 210 and under, and you might have run a 210 marathon, but you certainly doesn't guarantee you're going to win the race.
Hmm. Yeah, and then on the women's side, over the last few years, you have Hertestein too, who's um, just been uh, really kind of reinventing what can be done on that course on the women's side of it.
Yeah, most definitely. Comrades, for any of our listeners, if you want to try an exciting race like New York City Marathon, but it's very hilly, Comrades is the place to go.
Hmm.
They'll welcome you there for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so we get into kind of it's actually kind of funny to think about just how young some of the more modern certification processes are relative to the sport. But we have the IAU start recognizing three disciplines and world championships for all three of those as well, which I'm sure helps with that. Uh, what is the process like though in terms of all right, I have this event and I want it to be something that can kind of count or be recognized by that body. Is there a process that a race director kind of has to go through in order to make sure that their course and the event itself is something that if a record gets broken, they can walk away and say, "Hey, this was an actual certified record."
I'm going to let Bob answer that because he's for GOMU. He's our chief uh, person that's in charge of ratification. So give it to them, Bob.
Yeah, not. I've actually never directed a race, so I haven't done this myself. But basically, if you want to set an IAU record, your race needs to have an IAU label, and it's not that hard to do that. You can fill out the form online. You do have to have your race sanctioned by your national governing body, so USATF. In our case, it has to be a certified course. It has to be sanctioned. Those are the primary things, and then you get an IAU label. And then if you're IAU labeled, then you are in a position to submit your results for record validation.
Okay, so IAU basically kind of punts it to the governing body of whatever country it's being hosted in, and then they kind of do all the right stuff from there, and that's how they work that process.
Yeah, now IAU also has their own rules, and it can get a little fuzzy and messy sometimes. Pacing rule in particular is one that has become really problematic in recent years. Um, so there's there's World Athletics rules, there's IAU rules. So far, GOMU has not had any of our own rules. We have in our mission statement that we respect the rules and the records and the procedures of World Athletics and IAU. Um, those two bodies are not so interested in multi-day. IAU has a 24-hour World Championships. That's as far as they go. They do still maintain records for 48-hour and 6-day, but they've abandoned many of their other records that they used to track for multi-days, which is why GOMU is here. And Trishul can speak to that better. But it's probably going to reach the point soon. We're a relatively new organization. We've been here about 3.5 years. That we're going to need our own rules that for our championship events that are more tuned to multi-day. So that's an ongoing process. But right now we are just essentially in the same boat as IAU. We need national governing body certification, course certification, and so forth.
Yeah, Bob, you brought up like a perfect, I think, topic within this, which is like you sort of have this situation where you have a rule that IAU has or World Athletics has that makes a ton of sense if we're looking at the events they're traditionally looking at. Because I think of it like, oh yeah, if I'm racing a 10K and I get lapped
Yes,
intentionally, perhaps, and then I just help pace the person who's a lap ahead of me. I mean, I'm out of that race in all intents in terms of competing because I'm not coming back from a lap behind in a
yeah,
race that short. But we start getting, even into the 100-mile
yeah,
distance, certainly the multi-day stuff. And these looped courses are sometimes a quarter mile long or 400 meters
right,
long.
right,
It's like if you could get lapped a dozen times and not be anywhere near out of it. And then like pacing off someone just to me feels like, okay, I'm in a marathon and there's a pack of maybe six guys and I decide I'm going to kind of sit behind them
absolutely,
and pace off, and no one's batting an eye at that.
yeah.
Um, but
It's
so it's sort of like one of those rules that it makes sense in its original intent, but when we start trying to apply it to ultra marathon, we almost need to kind of say, okay, let's be reasonable about what the history of the sport has had in the past and make it make sense, essentially.
yeah, it's yeah, a couple of things there. One is you can't, in a long enough race, you don't even know if you're on the same lap as somebody else.
Yeah.
Guy could be 10 laps ahead or behind. You have no clue. You're just running together. Also, for these short loop ultras, the the social aspect of running with someone is often a huge part of the experience. It really just doesn't make any sense. The problem is that the way the rule is written, it's basically left up to the race director to make a subjective call as to whether somebody is like intentionally pacing or just happening to run together, and they warn or DQ the runner or not. But the problem comes when later a record was set and uh, some ratification committee has to review it, and then they have different eyes than the race director had. And if someone says, "Oh, this person ran with this other person for 5 hours," then there's a judgment call, and it's not fair to the runner because the runner was not informed they were doing anything wrong. So this has been an issue for various records, and as a result, USA Track and Field has now modified their rules and basically says that running together in a short loop ultra is not considered unfair assistance. And that change has not been made for World Athletics or IAU, but I think it makes things so much simpler. Yes, there is theoretical possibility for someone to go out there and just act as a pacer, but that's also something that, as Davy Crockett has said, historically has very often been done in ultras. When Jim Malmsley ran his 50-mile world record, he had pacers, people who were in the race there to pace him. Now, because that was a linear course, there wasn't any of this looped issue, but the point is they were there to pace him. Yes, they were legitimately in the race, and this is just the way the game works sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, these are some of the things that we'll be struggling with as we draft our own GOMU set of multi-day rules.
Yeah, and I think it's something where I think even if you look at the spirit of kind of how they've structured things in shorter endurance races too, it's like, yeah, if you're at the Olympics or World Championships, you can't have pacers who at the beginning are gonna their intent is to drop out after they pace a certain number of laps. But for setting world records and things like that, you can. So it does seem kind of odd that like you would have a non-championship race have to follow a rule like that for all the reasons we said, and then
Yeah.
even in similarity with some of these other distances that are a little more kind of within the Olympic distance realm.
hmm It's funny, speaking of Walmsley's 50-mile record, at the time that he ran that, Hoka was making a lot of noise, 50-mile world record. IAU at the time did not recognize a 50-mile world record. 50-mile was just this weird sort of American distance. It had
Yeah,
some
yeah.
historical importance in England, but it was only later, I guess, there was a push by Hoka to retroactively go and ratify that once IAU brought that on board as a distance that they tracked.
Just a quick reminder that Delta G ketones is my go-to exogenous ketone source. You can get 20% off at deltagketones.com when you use promo code BITTER20. Check out my full description of how I use Delta G ketones at the end of the episode. So in a situation like that, you can go back and once it starts recognizing, you can go back, and if you have the proper documentation and stuff and everything that they would need in order to certify it, they'll say, okay, we'll put this on the list.
Yeah, IUU, when they did that, they went through a process of trying to find the best every time they add a format, they have a definition of what constitutes sufficient documentation for an initial record, because often it's not going to be, submitted and ratified the way that a record that is run now was. We had the same thing when we launched GOMU, because we track records for dozens of formats that IAU does not. And in each case, we have criteria laid out over what constitutes sufficient knowledge and documentation for our initial records. And every record in our database is annotated, whether it's initial or GOMU ratified, or in the case of 48-hour and 6-day, those are IAU records. And we just reflect those into our database. And we say these are IAU records or GOMU records or initial records.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it is something where it seems like the sport now is seen as enough of a community between all these different races and distances that it almost makes sense to me that we have sort of like a body like GOMU that is sort of like just focusing on like what are we trying to get out of our particular disciplines versus what we would maybe see somewhere else, and have that make sense. So because right now it almost feels like there's like you got to appease like three different bodies essentially in
Yeah,
order to have something
yeah,
go through. And when I think about that, I think of like the cool thing about these timed events and these flat loop courses is they do about as good of a job as you're going to find at leveling the playing field in terms of like anybody can, with enough time obviously, go out and run a short loop and get course specific training. Whereas when we get in the trail side, it can be a little bit more opportunistic in the sense of, oh, I have access to this mountain range, or maybe you live on the course literally and you're training up
uh-huh,
and down those mountains all day long
yeah,
versus someone who's got to come from, the city or has no chance to specifically prepare for it. But then when we layer in all these complexities in terms of chasing records because they have to be so finely uh, done, essentially, it almost eliminates that value that you have from the opportunity aspect.
yeah, it's true.
So with Gumo going forward, is the goal that it branches out and covers other disciplines outside of the multi-day stuff, or is it just basically going to try to focus on kind of 48-hour and beyond for the foreseeable future?
48 and beyond it, it's like we go up to 3,100 miles, so from the self transcendence 3,100. And what we do is we track if you look at our non-standard records, you'll see every 100K and 100 miles, 2,900 miles, 2,500 miles, 3,000K, 4,000K. So we track every 100 miles, 100K, and then we have some standard records, and we've expanded. Instead of just 2-day, 6-day, we have like 3-day, 10-day, the 3,100-mile race. And so we would just want to document these great performances that these athletes have done. And in the 3,100-mile race, it is certified, it is measured perfectly. They're very meticulous. So, and we look at all of this and we do our own ratification. Bob looks at it, I look at it, and we want to make sure that that course was measured properly, and the lap sheets, we might make sure that everything has been marked down, everything has been recorded. And, I go down to that race and, I observe it. I spend, not only have I done it, but I've almost gone every year and just watched it. And they do a terrific job. So getting back to it is that we record everything that's beyond, actually from 300K up. So, and they're such fantastic performances. And it's just for a benchmark for people to have the aspirations to see if they can take it one step farther.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like with any time you have growth, you're going to have some level of complexity and then at times controversy, I think, in terms of how all that stuff ends up playing out in real time. So like I mean, the one I think that kind of jumps out to people following the sport is maybe Steinrex's 6-day event. I'm blanking on the name of the specific event that she did that at, but that's been one where it's sort of been like, when I look at it, I think like this seems like they did everything I would expect an organization to do in order to kind of say, okay, this event happened, this person did this, and therefore it's a new standard. But can you guys maybe fill me in on where the complexities are on that particular thing and what's maybe being worked through in that particular situation?
Oh boy, this is a challenge for us and somewhat behind our, need to establish our own rules. We don't want anything to be confusing for the athlete about what they need to do to set a record. In this case, this was a 6-day race in Denmark at Abibro, where Steenrex surpassed Camille's 6-day world record. It's not been ratified. It was IAU labeled. It's very clear that she ran the distance. The issue is, again, is pacing, and the race director and Steen were all convinced they were following the pacing rules. The race director did not say you can't do this during the race. The IAU Records Ratification Committee has had a different perspective. So this is it's very frustrating to us because we care about these things quite a lot. The 6-day world record is a wonderful thing. We are not currently in the position of being the ones that ratify 6-day because we want, our goal is to serve the community as well as we can. And when we first started, we said, well, we don't want to create any confusion by having our own set of 48-hour and 6-day records that are going to conflict with IAUs. Going forward, I don't know really what's going to happen, but we need to make it clearer to our athletes what is expected and required of them, and make the process, much more consistent and streamlined. So it's definitely something that weighs on our mind and is going to inform our rules that we come up with for our multi-day events.
Yeah.
Also, we have world championships, and my dream is she's coming back to Poland, where we have the GOMU 48-hour world championship, and I hope she can better it there. At least their 48-hour, and then we have a 6-day world championship, which Bob is going to, and he's one of the big representatives for the USA. Good job, Bob. And he's, there's some women like Meg Eckhart and Irina Masanova, and they are shooting. They're going to be perhaps the first woman to do 606. I know Irina. She's pretty intensely training, and and same with Meg Eckert, a fantastic talent. She can do it all, and I would love to see them take it one step farther. And in those events, there won't be any pacing problems. It's at the GOMU championships. We're making sure that all criteria is met. And we're going to make sure that as I say, all I's are dot, all T's are crossed, and that there's not going to be any. The courses are measured accurately, and we also we have course certifiers before and after, and also the timers are the best in, let's say, in France or in Poland. It's going to be the best, and we have it live. It's going to be tracked and live streamed, so there's no. Everybody can observe and see the reality that's happening.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the reasons why I even brought it up was because I think it's one of those things where when I think people passively hear these things, they think like, oh, well, that's you can't do that, or the athlete was. How do we know if they were doing something nefarious or not? We can't get in their head and know. But I mean, I remember when I did the 100-mile U.S. Road Championships in 2021, I won it, and it was like I'm running around this like 1.17 mile loop, and there was a person who wasn't in the event who was just kind of spectating. He was just out there because it's like an open, it's not closed. It's not like at the Olympics where like if someone jumps on the track, they're gonna get tackled immediately. So this kid was basically, he was just following me. I was probably like maybe 70 miles in. And I just looked over at Lynn Gentling, who was the USATF rep, after like he had been kind of tagging along before. I was like, hey, like, because I was pretty aware that was probably not something that was going to be acceptable, or if it was, or I was uncertain to some degree, and I was, I wasn't looking to get DQ'd for something that I wasn't trying to do. So there's like this element of like uncontrollability too, where, you have like these events and these scenarios, and there's participants out there, there's spectators out there, and, someone could be out there running for 5+ days and not have any control over what people are doing around them. And then, nowadays too, there's video cameras on everything. So it can be pretty easy just to kind of grab a clip and say like, hey, look, this was illegal, and kind of create controversy where maybe there was none.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, I can say that regardless of who the governing body is, whether it's of course, World Athletics is really the only governing body. But if it's the IAU or GOMU or any of these organizations, anybody outside of the competitors cannot be with that runner, because then it is illegal pacing. One type of pacing is if the runner is in the race, but it's certainly not at our championships will we ever allow somebody from the outside ever to even go a step with that person. They might hand them water. Let's say if it's their handler, they'll hand them their water, go 2 steps. But there is, even in ultra running today, there is a limit on how far the person can. There's like a little area how far a person can, the pacer can hand the refreshment to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the transition zones, and it
Yeah.
seems like they've gotten that pretty well dialed at like the 100K World Championships and stuff like that. It's set up a lot more like you would imagine on an event where it's pretty clear like this is a course, stay off of it, and these are transition zones, don't take aid outside of them and things like that. So part of it's probably just kind of getting to that point where we have the infrastructure to really be able to kind of put those things in place and properly kind of observe and stuff like that. I did want to ask, because I know we've talked a little bit about the pacing side of things. Are there any other rules that have sort of been floating around the ultra world that just don't really make sense, that or maybe rules that do make sense that aren't in place, that aren't on other one, or like the more traditional stuff that would be recognized by the larger governing bodies that you guys are looking at to see if we can kind of come to a consensus within kind of the multi-day or ultra world?
Shoes.
Yeah, good question.
The shoes, usually it's the stack height has to be 40 millimeters or under and have 1 carbon plate. And these days, there's a lot of controversy around the shoes. A lot of the shoes, and there was a recent episode with at the Jackpot where a runner did a fantastic performance under 12 hours, also for 100 miles. And this poor runner, his shoes were above the stack height, and he he didn't win the national championship because of it. So there's always, the IAU has to really give much more stricter, guidance for about the shoes. But as far as we have it right now, it's 40 millimeters and under, but there's also a World Athletics list that you have to have the shoe sanctioned. It's like the shoe has to be the World Athletics have to approve of it. So there's all these things with shoes, and in the old days, the old pedestrians had only leather shoes, and then in my day, it was not a problem,
Right.
We just had our, the waffle trainers, the Nike waffle trainers and so forth. So the stack height was never a problem, but stack height and carbon plates change things a bit. Now in the super long stuff, I don't think a carbon plate in a multi-day is going to really help after 24 hours. In fact, it's probably going to be a hindrance. So, but it's the cushioning of the shoe. So that's going to be has to be dealt with. And it's but everything else. There seems to be a lot of the rules that the IAU has that make a lot of sense, and they all they care about is really good sportsmanship and fair play. So level playing field. And at GOMU also, we just want level playing field and good sportsmanship is really important to us. And just bring all the world's best together and have a go at raising the bar. And our rules will be in play within a year, and we're bringing some people that are going to really help us to define these rules and there.
Narrow down on something. Yeah, it is interesting because I remember when the shoe regulations first came out, because there's some divergence between track and road too, where the 40 millimeter single plate rule is a road rule, whereas on the track it's actually 25 millimeters, I believe. So there was like a little bit of a conversation about that with ultra running, because I mean we do some of these on a track, so it's like, well, do we follow the 25 millimeter rule or is it like the 40 millimeter rule? And I think if I remember right, the 40 millimeter one is the one they go by on, because aren't we even looking at track surfaces now as basically, or World Athletics isn't even acknowledging track anymore, right? They're calling it all road or open.
I believe so. I think that at least in the ultra field, used to be in my day in the 80s, it'd be road records, track records, indoor records. Now it's just whatever the best one is, road, track, or indoor. And so the rules back when I did them weren't as, I'm not saying strict, we were very strict, but there weren't as many. And so the shoe rule, we just, whatever shoe there was, we were happy to wear them.
Yeah. I actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I put up a post in anticipation of this episode on Instagram, and I had one of the clips or one of the pictures said like that the sport dated back to the 1700s, and someone commented on it and said running shoes weren't even invented until the late 1800s. What were these people wearing?
Leather shoes, and that's that fascinated all of us. When we started out, these guys ran 600 miles in leather shoes, and even the great Ted Corbett, his shoes, they were like, sometimes he would go running in leather shoes, it's, and also another thing is technology today. It's fantastic. Back then, we're dealing with, dirt tracks. Now they're better surfaces. And so, that's also comes in play.
Yeah.
The shoe thing, just to drill down a little bit more, it is kind of a critical issue right now because, World Athletics has this now, and it was this rule that said you'd have to be below 40 millimeters stack height and no more than one carbon plate. Now they have an explicit list of approved shoes. And as of, I believe, last November, IAU is saying that for IAU sanctioned events and records, shoes have to be on this list. Problem is that list, the majority of the shoes on it are obsolete. The majority of shoes that are not obsolete that are on the list are carbon plate shoes. There's actually a very small number of road shoes that are available in the US that are on that list, like 5. And none of them are by major manufacturers. It's a really serious issue for me as a 24-hour team management, but also I have friends looking to set records and pulling their hair out because there's no incentive for the shoe manufacturers to push through these shoes that are not going to be used for, 10K world records or whatever, because people running multi-days don't want these carbon plate shoes. But what are we supposed to do to set our records? So it's this is an issue again where GOMU needs the existing rules that are out there are not suitable for multi-day.
Just a quick reminder, Maui Nui venison is one of my favorite protein sources. The reason, they have balanced an invasive species, the axis deer, that is devastating to the Maui habitat if not kept in check, all while providing some of the most nutrient-dense meat source you will find. Consider letting them know that you heard of them from me by taking a look at their website at mauinuivenison.com/bitter. You can also check out the full description of how I use Maui Nui venison at the end of the episode. Mm-hmm. Is it the carbon plate stuff that is the biggest concern with the multi-day, or is there a stack height consideration too, where they would think about maybe removing that element?
No, I think that everybody is good with the 40 millimeter stack height. It's just that there's just not that many shoes on that list, and we need to go back to something like the blanket, under 40 millimeters, no more than one plate. Everybody would be happy. Well, almost everybody would be happy with that. I know of one person who would not be happy with it, but yeah, we can live with that.
Yeah, and some of it is just like, I mean, I got asked this question a few times too, because when I ran my world record, I wasn't wearing super shoes.
Mm-hmm.
I was wearing like basically a marathon racing flat. So my claim to fame is still I might have the fastest 100-mile time in a non-super shoe. So
Awesome. Yeah.
but hopefully if I lower my time, it'll probably be in a super shoe. So
Yeah.
there is that. But yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where it's like, to some degree, like, I find myself in this situation, I guess, where it's like, when I started running, super shoes didn't exist. And when a lot of ultrarunners are probably in that boat, where now we have this transition where, similar to like in swimming with the speed suit, which
Yeah.
they went the
Yeah.
opposite direction and pulled it, or, cycling's probably an even better example where, these bikes have gotten better and better and better over the years, to the degree where there's a meaningful performance difference between, a carbon fiber bike frame and a steel frame bike frame. And there's a meaningful difference between like a super shoe with the premium foams and a plate versus, the old kind of racing flats that people would want to wear or try to get away with maybe in the past. So yeah, I mean, some of it I think is just like, you kind of just got to roll with the changes to some degree, where, sports are going to innovate, things are going to change. And like, if I was setting records in the 1980s, there's really nothing I can do about it. And if it's not the shoes, it's going to be something else eventually. So I think I do like that we're paying attention to these things and not letting like turning it into like an entirely different sport altogether. But some innovation has to be acceptable, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, technology, there's nothing wrong with technology, and we advance with technology. And, what we did in the 1980s was, or the 90s, was a different era. They say a generation is every 20 years. And, there was one generation from 1980s to 2000s. Then there's a new generation. And as I said, there was once just dirt tracks. Now there are rubberized tracks. And so the performances are better. There's a little more spring. So you just have to salute the era in which it was and appreciate what they did at that time. So in the old pedestrian races, the leather shoes were in awe of them. And then what we did in the 1980s with just regular old sneakers, that's awesome too. And so we just have to recognize, but we also have to go move forward with technology. And GOMU is 100% behind technology,
Mm-hmm.
how it rolls.
Yeah, and I think to some degree it's also just like kind of as an athlete, and as like, record-breaking athletes in the sport, I think it's probably just like a healthy thing to look at it through that lens of, this is going to be something where I broke this record. It's probably not going to stand forever. So eventually it's going to get broken. And when it gets broken, there's a good chance it'll be some innovations that were involved along the way, especially as we span out through generations, like you said, Trishul. And then I think that just incentivizes us to kind of do what we're doing today, talk about the history of the sport, be able to kind of compartmentalize these things in a way where we can look back at some of the races that were done decades ago and really appreciate, wow, they did that without this, or they did that with this hurdle that we don't have anymore. And that's really impressive. And I think that, if anything, that probably helps cement the legacy, better than just trying to like preserve records based on having us run around in leather shoes like they did in the 1800s.
Right.
No, records are borrowed; they're never owned.
Yeah.
Zach, it's like that's the most important thing. I think if you can be detached when somebody breaks your record, and whatever that record may be, and offer good sportsmanship by congratulating that person, job well done. I think that's the most important thing. The standard is going to get better and better, and the athletes, the faster guys, those 207 marathoners that try the 50 mile or the 100 mile, and they're just got the leg speed to do better. And plus, we also have better nutrition. So than it was in my day. There was much more, electrolyte replacement, supplementation. So the main thing is saluting technology, but we can salute and say kudos to the records that was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I guess we're just blessed to have the problem of a sport that's so old that we can go back and compartmentalize it into so many different categories of what we had available to us at the time. Cool. Yeah, so anything else that's exciting that's coming up with GOMU and just timed events and longer ultras and stuff in general that you guys are thinking about as we kind of grow as a sport?
Well, GOMU, what I can say as the president of GOMU and Bob as the record keeper, we're excited about our world championships. And what I would like to see is a lot better American representation. A lot of these, even though we're self-selected, these are championships. And what's beautiful about what we're doing is age groups. So we get people that set world age group records in our races. Sometimes when you have it federation based, you only take the best athlete to do that type of championship. And but I chose self-selected because it's everybody gets involved. It's all inclusive, and the multi-days are not just about the greatest performances in the open division, but people, we've had records for an 85-year-old, and these matter too. And I'm in the 65 to 69 age group, and it was fantastic to watch the 6 or 7 guys that were in my age group, the world's best, go at it and see a world age group record by Anatoly Kruglikov of Russia, and these championships are championships inside themselves, the age group championships, and then the open, and we're all one big happy family, trying to raise the bar. So, GOMU, we're excited to have our championships, have the world's best be there. And you'll see it in the 48-hour. We have some of the 3 best men and women. They're going to duke it out. We have Matthew Bone, and who is from Belgium, who set the world record for 6 days. He's trying to break Koros's 48-hour record. We have Bartosz Fidali from Poland, and then Mr. Pedrowski, he who's run over 300K or 188 miles for 24 hours. He's trying also for the record. And then on women's side, we have Victoria Brown and Steen Rex. And then, of course, we have, what's her name? Patricia Bernowska of Poland. So it's exciting that in the open division, these people are coming forward and trying to up the ante. And then, but it's also exciting to see the best age group runners in our races, to duke it out. Like me, I had tears in my eyes to see the world age group record broken. And how about Don Winkley? He says, he's in the 85-year-old age group, and this guy, what was his name? Paul Bozo from Hungary. He said, he came back to me afterwards, Don Winkley, and said, I got my clock cleaned by. They're both walking on the track, and it was just wonderful to see that, the spirit of competition, no matter what your age is, and GOMU's about being all inclusive with all the age groups and, all the countries. We just want to see the bar raised, and, we're about, presenting what the records are and for people to go out in our championships and try to better them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you reminded me in 2021, I think actually in a couple of years after, it kind of continued because it sort of gained a little momentum, I think, where at the 100-mile road championships, there were 4 men in the 80-plus division. And it was just like, in prior years, like if you got one person of that age, it would have been like, wow, this is cool. And then on top of it, like if you finish, you're probably going to win if you're that old. Now you could be off the podium and be 80 years for your age group. So I remember they did a big story about that one because that was kind of the big kind of I mean, that's the cool thing about
Yeah.
our sport too, is there's like so much storytelling potential here. So you can kind of really lean into those things that would maybe be a little more obscure, because they have such a kind of eye-catching type of scenario to them.
Yeah. I'm really excited about where multi-day is going now. I mean, if you look back to the heyday of the late 19th century, 6-day races where, they would have them in Madison Square Garden and there's enormous prize purses and the records. If you talk to Davy Crockett, you just had on, he'll tell you that the 6-day men's American record is James Albert's 621 miles. That's not the record that's on the books for USATF. That's Joe Fiji's 606. So how is it they were running over 600 miles in the 19th century with the shoes they had? That was the thing. It was like the NASCAR of the late 19th century. There's enormous money in it, an enormous interest in it. And, the sport of 6-day and multi-day running died for decades, and it's been back for several decades now. But just in this last year, we saw the men's and the women's 6-day records fall. We've had 48-hour. Giannis still has his 48-hour, but a women's 48-hour has fallen. And I'd like to think that GOMU is especially our world championship races, thanks to Trishul's vision here, has played a big part in reviving interest. And I'm just really excited to see where it goes from here. We've got, for such a long time, Giannis was just so much better than everybody else. It's like, why bother? He has like the top 10 best 48 hours, right? And it was the same with 24-hour and 6-day. Why bother trying to go compete against Giannis? There's Giannis and there's everybody else. But now his 24-hour record is gone. His 6-day record is gone. And it's sort of, like maybe when the 4-minute mile was broken. I think we're back in the glory days of multi-day racing again. And it's really exciting to be part of it.
Yeah.
So I tell all the listeners, Zach, this is now the golden age of multi-day running is coming, and be part of it and observe it, and it's a special time. So I just would love more Americans, and hey, here's an opportunity to be in a world championship. It's self-selected, and I would love you guys. The Harvey Lewises. I know he's involved with the backyards. The Harvey Lewises come out, or the people on his level, duke it out and see where you can take it, and and I think they will. The two guys, the Belgians that did the backyard that have the record, they're coming to France to our world championship. And, there's a few other guys that you might not have heard of, and they're just under the radar. And, there might be some real surprises. And once they do it, other people said, I can do that too. So it's the golden age,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nowadays things can catch on so quickly too. I think just like from when I started running ultras in 2010 to today, it was like when I would talk to people in the running community about ultra marathons, it would be, you'd get strong runners and you'd say like, hey, would you ever consider doing a 100-miler? And they're like, oh no, I would never want to do a 100-miler. Like, I can't do a 100-miler or something like that. And now it's like I see more people, they'll reach out to me for coaching or something like that, and they'll be like, yeah, I've never run before and I think I want to do a 100-mile race. It's like you get so much momentum, and some of it's just from the outside too, where you get like some random influencer, or you get like some big personality like David Goggins or something like that decide they want to challenge themselves in some epic way. And that just lends itself to the multi-day stuff, because you're always going bigger and higher mileage and things like that with that sort of mentality. So I think you're right. I think we're going to see a huge resurgence in the multi-day stuff, especially as the sport continues to grow in the shorter stuff too. You're going to always have people looking for like, what's next, or maybe I'll try this out. And then, like someone like Courtney DeWalter, who hasn't been shy about, dipping her toe into some of the stuff that are maybe not her, like her typical passion on the trails and things like that, I think are really cool for the sport to see that sort of stuff happen. And when more people get interested in it.
There's also in the trails, these are multi-days as well. What Courtney does, they're 200-mile runs.
Yeah,
they're not done in a day. They're done in 3 days because of the elevation gain or just of the technical footing, whatever it may be. And now there's a a group putting on a 300-mile trail race, and our Vipa is they have their Cocodona 250. Well, some of these races, they're all in the single track trails, and these races aren't going to take you a day, 2 days, or even 3 days. For the normal guy, not the elite, it's going to take them 4 days, 50 miles a day. So these are multi-days as well. And, as I said, also the backyards are multi-days, a different kind of format, but, 4 miles an hour until rock till you drop. And it's basically, those are multi-days too. And it's exciting times, most definitely.
Yeah. And some of it's just having like the infrastructure there too. And I think this is what I really appreciate about organizations like Aravaipa, because if Jamil just wanted to maximize profits, he would just lean into like a handful of his events that are like probably carrying the lion's share of the revenue. But like he's interested in the history of the sport. So having events like across the years and Desert Solstice available to kind of have that there. So when that surge of interest comes, there's like legit places to go and do it. And I think growing that and seeing that framework in place and being able to replicate it is going to be important as we start seeing these things grow, along with, everything that goes into it with GOMU and getting the certifications and all that stuff set up so that people know when they're going to something that they can take a fair crack at something that's going to get recognized if they have a good day.
Yeah, as I said, and there's also on the East Coast here in the United States, there's some new ones popping up. There's like the old 6-day in Philadelphia, and even in there's Notchview Ultras for those trail people. They have the 3-day race, 2-day race. So on the East Coast, there's new multi-days starting to come alive. And it's, as I said, more and more people are going to give it a go. And they can only go so fast, but they're curious to see how far they can go. And that's what interests me. I could only go so fast, I just can't go any faster, but how far can I go? And there's different just formats to try. There's 2-day records, 3-day records, 6-day records, 10-day records, 1,000-mile, 1,000K. And it keeps going on. And he gives you an opportunity to set a national record in your age group or in your a world age group record. You might be good enough to do 1,000K world record for the 50 to 55. And so it gives incentive to people that will say, gosh, I could actually set a world record, and gives them the incentive to try these things. So it's good stuff.
Yeah. Bob, one thing I was going to ask you too that Davey shared with me was, because one question I was like, when he's explaining like what you were mentioning before about how popular those 6 days were, where I think he said like the top 6-day runners were making the equivalent of today's standards $500,000 a year sometimes from going around and doing these events.
Yeah.
And so you start thinking like, well, what happened? Like, why did it like kind of just stop happening? And he said it was like a lot of regulations making it essentially illegal to put these events on, because essentially they were stealing a lot of market from participation in things like theater and even churches and things like that. And that's why a lot of the events started getting suppressed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Why it's 6 days, right? Because you can't do anything on Sunday.
On the 7th, yeah.
Doing, a maximal endurance thing in the Victorian era, it has to be not on Sunday. I've heard that also bicycles came along and bicycle races started taking people away. I know there was a popular movement against these sorts of things. They were seen to be cruel, and just sort of sideshow kind of thing, parading people around who are just beating themselves to death. I don't, Davey would know a lot better than I would what actually transpired with the original demise, but it's a shame.
Yeah, and it's probably a variety of things, like you mentioned. It's that kind of lends itself to making it just too difficult for people to want to be able to do it or be able to do it, and then decades go past, and all of a sudden it's almost non-existent for a while. But we'll get the resurgence one way or the other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I also believe it was the bicycle. Back then, the bicycle became popular, and so that grabbed the people's attention, the audience that watched these races. And so the interest waned because there was the new era of the bicycle. And then I think it had a little resurgence with the Bunyan Derbies, which went across America in 1929 and maybe 1928, 1929. So there's always something new, but but for the modern times, it's we've been doing this. The first race was in 1980, the Spirit of 80, which was created by Don Choi, and so we've been at it now. Oh gosh, over 40 years, and I think it's going to keep going on. Maybe this will be the 100-year. There'll be a 100-year anniversary of multi-days in the future, and who knows? But I think it's here to stay.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank both of you guys for taking some time to chat about this stuff. It's just great that we have people like you in the community that are as interested as you are, and I'm sure tons of volunteer hours go into a lot of this stuff where like, someone like me can just tap into the resources that you've put out there and learn more about what the sport was like and kind of where it's heading and things like that. But yeah, I really appreciate all you've done and taking some time to come on in here chat.
Thank you for having both Bob and I. We're very grateful, and thank you very, very much for having us. And look forward to anybody come out and watch the multi-days.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Speaking of that, where can people find both of you online, or is there like websites and things people can head to if they want to learn more?
GOMU.org. That's where that's our organization. Go to GOMU.org, and we have a Facebook group page where I try to put all different things on about the multi-days. So you can join that group. The GOMU Facebook group page and our website of GOMU.org, and become our Facebook friend,
Yeah.
and then we talk all about it.
Yeah, there's all sorts of good stuff on the Facebook page as well as the Ultrarunning history page too. That's sort of reinvigorated my use of Facebook to some degree, is those two spots.
Yeah.
And also Instagram. We have also an Instagram account, and you just got to go on gomu.org. We also have photos of all our world championships on Instagram. So that might inspire people as well.
Perfect. Well, I'll definitely link all that stuff in the show notes too, so listeners can head over there and click on that and follow and check out and get motivated to, who knows, maybe someone will learn from this episode that they're a 6-day runner and go and break a 6-day world record or something like that.
It'd be awesome.
I hope so. That's what it's all about. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for sticking around to listen to how I use the show sponsors. Maui Nui Venison is a product I discovered last year. What caught my eye was their quality and business model. They have paired the need to manage an invasive species with providing some of the most nutrient-dense meat you will find. The axis deer arrived in Maui in single digits, but grew fast and have damaged the local ecosystem, and left it unchecked are projected to reach up to 200,000 in number in future years. Maui Nui decided to solve this problem and minimize waste. Axis deer meat provides 43% of your daily value of protein in just 107 calories and boasts a 1.5 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which is the most balanced ratio of any red meat. The same 107 calories provides 22% of your daily value of vitamins and 37% of your daily value of minerals. They have a wide range of products, including ground venison, leg medallions, rib chops, strip loin, loin fillet, and loin chops. They also make a beef stick that includes an option with organ meats, which makes a perfect protein-packed snack that I will usually have in the afternoon before a strength session. I have also been enjoying the ground venison for dinner, usually paired with steamed vegetables or a sweet potato. You can find a bunch of recipes and ways to prepare their product on their website at mauinuivenison.com/bitter. Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte supplement. Based on my electrolyte loss rate of 614 milligrams per liter, I begin my day with half a packet of one of their hot beverage flavors with my morning coffee. I rotate through all of them, but my favorite at the moment is the chocolate mint. Later in the day, I have been having either a packet of their watermelon flavor or a can of their Element Sparkling, which is their carbonated electrolyte drink. I usually have the black cherry lime or watermelon flavor for those. If you are curious about how to dial in your own fluid and electrolyte setup, check out episode 300 of this podcast, where I dive into some things you can do at home to gauge how much fluid and electrolytes you may need. Delta G ketones is the best researched exogenous ketone supplement on the market. The research on exogenous ketones is continuously evolving, but Delta G is responsible for much of it, boasting 50 plus published studies and 20 plus ongoing studies, and have received DARPA grants designed for special forces. Delta G uses ketone esters, which is unmatched in raising blood ketone levels when matched per gram. The best use case, as the evidence currently stands, is as a post-workout supplement for better recovery and or during longer, lower intensity sessions to help with mental focus. For this reason, I have a bottle of long Delta G Performance, the blue bottle, after my biggest workout for the week and during long run training sessions once I have been out running for 45 to 60 minutes. Some links and promos for listeners from these brands include a free sample pack of the key flavors of Element by heading to drinklmnt.com/HPO, 20% off your next order of Delta G Ketones at deltagketones.com with promo code BITTER20, and Maui Nui Venison at mauinuivenison.com/bitter. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.